Every VRAM size, 128 megabytes of VRAM, is like the starter pack of graphics memory. Think of it as training wheels for your GPU. Back in the early 2000s, this was enough to run games at modest resolutions and low settings. Picture Half-Life 2, tiny textures, simple effects, and maybe a few jagged edges, but the games were playable. For modern standards, forget it. 128 megabytes can't handle a single AAA game today without crying in a corner. Even loading a simple 1080p texture would make your system stutter like it just discovered stairs for the first time. It's also worth noting that this memory limit doesn't just affect visuals. It hits frame rates, anti-aliasing, shadows, and any fancy post-processing effects. If VRAM were a backpack, 128 megabytes could carry a sandwich and a bottle of water. Maybe a snack for your dog, but that's it. Anything bigger, like a high-res texture, is left on the counter. But back in the day, this was a revolution. Graphics cards like the GeForce FX 5200 or Radeon 9600 proved that even a tiny pool of memory could make worlds feel immersive. 512 megabytes of VRAM arrived in graphics cards. It felt like a real upgrade. Suddenly, games could run smoother and look better without constantly slowing down. Around the mid-2000s, titles like Half-Life 2, Oblivion, and World of Warcraft could actually show more detailed textures and environments at 1280 by 1024 or even 1600 by 1200 resolutions. Shadows were softer, effects like smoke and fire looked more realistic, and your GPU could handle more without stuttering. Graphics cards like the GeForce 7600 GT, Radeon X 1600 XT, and early GTX 460 used 512 megabytes VRAM. They made gaming more playable and even gave casual gamers a chance to experience better-looking worlds without spending a fortune. When 1 gigabyte of VRAM became standard, it felt like finally giving your GPU a proper workspace instead of a cramped desk. Before this, textures had to be squeezed and shuffled constantly, but 1 gigabyte allowed games to load larger, sharper assets without choking. By the late 2000s, you could run Crysis, Call of Duty 4, or Assassin's Creed at 1080p with medium to high settings, enjoy realistic shadows, detailed character models, and dynamic environments, all without grinding frame rates to a halt. Mainstream cards like the GeForce GTX 460, Radeon HD 5770, and GTX 560 brought 1 gigabyte VRAM to most gamers. For the first time, VRAM stopped being a strict bottleneck and became a tool for real visual upgrades. 2 gigabytes of VRAM is where games start looking good, but sometimes only if you don't push them too hard. At 1080p, titles like Metro, Last Light could run on medium to high settings at around 40 to 50 frames per second. Dense streets in Batman, Arkham City loaded with NPCs and flickering lights, and Diablo 3 could handle full skill effects without turning your screen into a slideshow of sadness. Push it too far though, and textures might pop in like surprise guests at a party. Fun, but kind of annoying. This VRAM size could comfortably handle textures around 1 to 2 gigabytes, anti-aliasing at 2 times to 4 times, and moderate shadow quality. Open-world games with lots of objects or effects started to show their limits at 2 gigabytes. Large cities, lush forests, or highly modded games sometimes caused stuttering or long load times. Still, it was enough for most mainstream 1080p gaming, without forcing constant compromises. Graphics cards like the GeForce GTX 660, GTX 760, and Radeon R 9270X popularized 2 gigabytes VRAM. For the first time, players could explore bigger, denser worlds and see more detail than ever before. 4 gigabytes of VRAM is where your GPU stops sweating like it's running a marathon in July. At 1080p, GTA 5 could handle high to ultra settings at 50 to 60 frames per second, letting you admire every puddle reflection and billboard without your frame rate collapsing. With 4 gigabytes, textures up to 2 to 4 gigabytes fit into memory comfortably. Anti-aliasing at 4 times or even 8 times smoothed jagged edges without making your PC cry. Multi-monitor setups at 1080p each became playable, so you could look like a pro gamer instead of someone fighting with a lagging potato. 8 gigabytes of VRAM is where your GPU starts feeling like a pro athlete instead of a weekend jogger. At 1440p or even 4K, games like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and Cyberpunk 2077 could run on high to ultra settings with decent frame rates. This memory size handles textures up to 6 to 7 gigabytes in modern games, making high-res assets, advanced lighting, and ray tracing at medium settings possible without maxing out. Anti-aliasing at 8 times or higher works, shadows are crisp, foliage looks alive, and particle effects no longer make your GPU panic mid-explosion. You can even experiment with mods like Ultra Skyrim textures or high-quality ENB presets without seeing pop-in every 2 steps. 16 gigabytes of VRAM is where your GPU stops worrying and starts showing off. At 4K, games like Cyberpunk 2077, Microsoft Flight Simulator, and Red Dead Redemption 2 can push ultra textures, ray tracing, and massive draw distances without turning your frame rate into a slideshow. Your GPU finally has the breathing room to just flex. This VRAM size handles textures up to 12 to 14 gigabytes, high-quality shadows, complex reflections, and fully modded open worlds. Multi-monitor setups at 4K per screen are realistic, and VR or creative workloads like 3D rendering or video editing no longer max out memory in seconds. Even ray-traced reflections, real-time lighting, and high-res cinematic textures play nice without causing stuttering or pop-in. 24 gigabytes of VRAM is basically giving your GPU a private skyscraper to work in. You can load ultra-detailed textures, massive cities, and huge foliage layers, and the GPU barely breaks a sweat. Even massive particle effects, volumetric fog, and cinematic post-processing are no longer nightmares for memory. This memory size handles textures up to 20 gigabytes, ultra ray tracing, complex reflections, and multi-monitor setups at 4K or 8K. VR, 3D modeling, video rendering, and AI-assisted creative workloads become fluid instead of choking mid-scene. Essentially, 24 gigabytes VRAM isn't just for gaming. It's for the people running worlds inside their PC that would make older GPUs cry for mercy.